Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and I just got the brand new wave of LEGO Dreamzzz sets coming out January 1st, 2025 early here for review. This wave is actually one of the most interesting waves of LEGO Dreamzzz yet because the entire focus of the set wave is based on modularity. Here is a look at every single one of the brand new Dream sets, and aside from the two smallest ones in the poly bag, all of these sets come with interconnectable modules that you can use to mix and match up into different vehicles. It's actually a really cool system that isn't even that well advertised on the fronts of the boxes, so that's why I have them in hand for review, and we can see what sorts of crazy creations we can come up with. And so let's dive into a mega review of all of the 2025 LEGO Dream sets. Let's go. Okay, here is our 2025 January LEGO Dreamzzz lineup. There are a ton of different sets in total, all with a gaming theme. Starting off with a polybag, 30698 is Cooper's flying controller mini build, coming with a small brick-built opponent as well as a video game controller. Then we have Z-Blob's Robot and Vehicle Adventure set number 71487, which is a 20-in-1 set, allowing you to build a ton of different things for just $10. Next is 71488, Buns's Creative Animal Adventures, another $10 20-in-1 set that gives you the pieces to make a lot of different creatures, plus exclusive versions of the minifigure characters in both of those sets. Next up, we have 71489, Cooper's flying video game controller, and then we have 71490, Izzy and Buano the gaming bunny, both of which retail for $20 US. Buano includes a full-on buildable bunny in the similar vein as the other previous version of Buano that we've gotten before, except this time there is a gaming twist, and then the video game controller set includes an actual video game brick-built controller serving as the back engines of a sleek jet, which can be rebuilt into a helicopter, one of the more radical rebuilds of the Dreamzzz wave. They also introduced these new dual-molded brain-like enemies, which we'll get more into as we take a look at the actual sets. 71491 is Mateo with the Z-Blob action race car coming in at $50 US and a much larger brick-built opponent. And then finally, we have the largest $100 set of the wave in the form of 71497, Cooper's Tiger Mech and Zero's Hot Rod car. The most interesting thing to me about this new LEGO Dreamzzz wave is that every single set, aside from the smaller ones, are meant to be fully modularly compatible with each other. They all come with different bits and pieces of accessories which you can use to attach on to different versions of the vehicles to create your own upgrades to the vehicles themselves. And you can actually go pretty crazy with the combinations here. We're going to explore a lot of the wacky combinations, and you probably already saw some on the thumbnail of all the different things that you can do with it, but the general system is that most cars or wheeled vehicles in this wave have the option to swap out the front and back pieces of the car for the hoods. You also have a number of different weapon elements that can be mounted onto the sides of the vehicles themselves, and in a crazy case for the $100 set, almost every single component is modular, from the arms of the mech to the legs to the back rocket booster, to the way that the car itself is built for the villain vehicle. All of it is meant to interface with each other, and this comes with a lot of pros and, in my opinion, some cons as well. Because they specifically have made both the hero and the villain vehicles try to work with each other, it is a little bit confusing telling apart which sections are meant to be for the heroes and which sections are meant to be for the villains, and the color schemes are not quite as crisp and clear as normal LEGO themed waves are. The heroes have vastly different color schemes, and the villains have even some similar colors to the heroes, using a pretty generic white and black in order to allow them to interface with the hero vehicles. I actually think it's really cool that they allow you to mix and match with the heroes and villains, but because of that, I can imagine that kids might be confused as to who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, especially for the largest set, whose color schemes have been purposefully melded together to actually make each component interact with each other. But let's take a look at all of these modular components. I always love it when LEGO sets are modular, so this was a major win to me, and removing the polybag and the two smallest sets, we can take a look at all of the main sets in particular which have modular components. First off, the gaming jet here is pretty simple. You just have two stud shooter blasters on the side. The Mateo and Z-Blob race car here has a detachable fender, as well as a very useful detachable block element in the back, which allows you to just connect it up to all sorts of different things, plus detachable stud shooters, and the car itself has connectability to it. Bunchero the Gaming Bunny has probably one of the most simple integrations of the system so far, with just little rocket jets on the side of the skateboard the bunny is using, and really no other type of component. But then we get to the big one. The $100 set really justifies this modular system. You have two detachable arms, you have a detachable fender element for the front, you have the heads, which also are fully detachable, two blasters on the side of the vehicle, which you can remove and add to some of the other vehicles, a block on the back which you can remove, an axle connection for the way the legs are mounted onto the upper torso, which also is compatible with the car, and then the villain car has all these different components which you can split up. The villain cockpit, the two wheels, a special head that can detach on the back. There's a lot of different modules here, and actually, after you split up all the modules, here's a look at every single one that you can take a look at with so much different intercompatibility between them. Now that being said, this is a little bit less interchangeable than you might imagine just because it is using a system of clips and connectivity bars, which unfortunately are pretty limited in certain connections. It's not like Technic pins where you can pretty much connect like a clip piece to a clip piece or a bar piece to a bar piece. There are specific ways in which they are meant to attach. There are clips on the front of the Mateo car, which means that you can't attach another weapon with clips on the front of it. This is intended to make play simpler between all of the modules, but in my opinion also does unfortunately limit the amount of stuff that you can actually do with the builds. That being said, it is still a really cool system, and let's take a look at some of the crazy configurations we can get up to now before we actually jump into the individual reviews of the sets, which we're going to also be taking a look at as we go throughout the course of this video. I'm going to start off by taking a look at all of the different connection points on each of these vehicles, and clearly you can see that the $100 set of the Zero race car and Cooper's Tiger Mech really takes the most advantage of the system, with honestly the other sets just kind of adding on just an additional blaster here and there. I guess the Z-Blob car does give you another block where you can attach things, but for the most part, most of the connectivity pieces here come from the largest set, and personally I would have loved to see maybe even a little bit more interconnectivity between the models. I mean, if you're gonna do a gimmick like this, I say might as well go all the way, and it's a bit disappointing that, say, the Z-Blob race car is pretty much just a single solid build. It's not like you can separate out the wheels, and instead you just have to kind of use the vanilla components. That being said though, let's take a quick look at what you can do with the connectivity. First of all, there are multiple joints of connectivity here. You can use the axles on the Tiger Mech to attach onto the back of the Zero hot rod car, which allows you to have a bit of a different look. And then, of course, you can attach the cockpit from the Tiger Mech onto the front of that, just using connection pieces right there. Then, I'm going to grab the next component here, which are the front wheels of the hot rod car, attach that all the way up to the front here, and you can see where we're going with this. This is about to be a pretty crazy build, so let's speed this up and see where we land. This is the end result, an absolute monstrosity of trying to combine as many different individual components I can. Whenever LEGO introduces a modular system like this, I always try to make the most crazy and outlandish thing, combining as many individual components as I possibly can. Galador died 2022, born 2025, welcome back Galador, because this is basically that entire system, but just on a vehicle scale. I actually find it really cool how LEGO Dreamzzz tried to give us a number of different types of things, like you have car pieces, you have mech arms, you have creature arms, legs, you have blasters, heads, that are all interchangeable, and I really appreciate just the amount of variety that you get here. Sure, maybe we could have used a little bit more options in terms of different types of vehicles and stuff like that, but I'm actually pretty happy with just the amount of different things you can do. I feel like the only thing that we're really missing is maybe some sort of like attachable wings that are also mounted on the same clips, but then again, the LEGO City 2025 sets use the same exact function for the space theme, so you could literally just get a pair of wings from that. And that's a really cool thing about LEGO. Obviously, a lot of different themes use this system. It was first introduced in LEGO Monkey Kid, all the way back in, I think it was 2021 or 2022, and since then, a lot of different themes have used similar things. You can see that I just tried to create another completely different creature here, utilizing as many different parts that I could, and yes, the car underneath is connected to whatever this four-legged monstrosity is, all by a series of different clips. Sure, some of these connections are maybe a little more encouraged than others and a little less encouraged, and I don't really think this was the intent behind them doing a modular system. Like, I'm pretty sure clearly they were just trying to emphasize, look, you can attach the blasters on different things, and you can just do maybe some sort of minor customization to the way the vehicles work, but I always like to go very crazy with these. Still, I did want to showcase what may be a more vanilla type of customization, one that LEGO would expect kids to be doing with their actual sets by making a bunch of different standard style vehicles. So let's go into putting those together right now. I wanted to emphasize many different sets being used to combine into one, and so I tried to create different vehicles that were kind of a combination of everything. We've got new blasters on the jet, a four-legged creature that's a combo between the Tiger Mech and the Hot Rod car. We have Bunchuro the bunny with much larger blasters and booster jets on the side of the skateboard there. And then we have the Z-Blob action car with just a different style of front hood as well as jets on the back. And then we have what might be my favorite of the bunch, which is a very compact four-wheeled vehicle with a head in front. You know, I feel like this kind of reminds me of what we were getting back for the Rocky and Bionicle, where you have clearly animalistic creatures with mechanical components like wheels on the back, and then maybe you have like arms on the front, and I think that's a really cool aesthetic. It's something that LEGO hasn't really done since then, and I really wanted to emphasize just the amount of fun stuff you can do. Even Z-Blob is getting in on the fun with some of the spare parts by just having a bit of a glider here. I don't really know if that would count as an official thing, but you know, it works as a glider in my mind, so I like it. Of course, there's a lot of different things that you can do with these, and this just barely scratches the surface of the different types of combinations of things that you can do by just mixing and matching the different pieces. But I just want to say, yeah, I'm a big fan of how this system works. Sure, some of it could have been optimized, like the Cooper Mech blasters do not officially fit on the Cooper jet because of the exhaust trails in the back of them. They just aren't that far out, so again, just feels like there are some minor missed opportunities of some very obvious things to me. But for the most part, having a modular system with multiple different sets factored in is a ton of fun. But now, let's move on to taking a look at the actual sets themselves, and I'm going to start off by going from the largest to the smallest this time, because I just feel like the larger sets are just a lot more interesting to me. Starting off, let's take a look at the Cooper Tiger Mech and Zero's Hot Rod car. This is set number 71497 and it retails for $100 US, 100 euros, and it comes with 1,006 pieces, which is actually pretty good value for what you get. In terms of the figures, you get one brick-built spider-like opponent, you get the main villain of this season, Zero, sporting a really nice dual-molded helmet, a generic Dreamer who is new for the set, as well as two minions plus Cooper. One thing I always love to highlight when doing Dreamzzz reviews is the instruction manual. You can see that the instruction manual has a bit of a sneak peek towards some of the minifigures we might be getting in the summer wave. One interesting thing I'll talk about near the end of the video is the distribution of stuff, where obviously we only have half the team being represented in the January wave, with major omissions of pretty much half of the main characters, but clearly they're trying to do a split focus here for the waves, which isn't really something they've done before, but I do find that interesting. Of course, the way that this manual works in particular, as with all the LEGO Dream sets, is you can do two different options, so you can build one version or the other version. This, however, is particularly silly to me because the two different versions are literally just reconfigurations of the same exact modules, so they literally just printed the same instruction manual twice, and you just at the very end arrange the pieces in a different order. I think that's kind of silly. It's almost a little bit counterintuitive to LEGO's like whole mission of trying to be green and sustainable. They literally print the same thing twice because this is just modular, but I also get from a marketing perspective they wanted to emphasize that, oh look, it's two different styles of builds, it's two completely different things. So again, I much prefer having modules that you can swap in and out of each other versus just a completely different build for a 2-in-1 set. I think it's just really cool how they have different modules and then different ideas on different things you can do with the modules, but it does feel a bit silly how the instruction manuals literally just have you build the same thing twice depending on where you look. Obviously, as you can see here, they really wanted to emphasize different types of vehicles you could make. You could have a four-legged creature for Cooper or a four-legged creature for Zero. And herein lies one of my minor issues with the set, in that the villain and the hero factions, so to speak, are not very clearly well defined. Especially for a kid, it's very hard to tell, well, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy here. And again, some of this was intentional because obviously you're trying to make it such that the parts are modular, but unless in the story Cooper decides to team up with the villain, which, may I add, would be actually really cool. I think that would be awesome if they actually had a storyline where a hero teams up with a villain, kind of like what they're doing with Ninjago. It is a little bit confusing to have two very different hero and villain focused vehicles basically share the same color scheme. It's honestly done a lot better than the recent Ninjago hero and villain team up vehicle, which basically just had the color scheme of the hero, Aaron, and none of the villain's color scheme. I would have much preferred it if, like, Ninjago literally just did this, and that would have been super cool, but alas, for LEGO Dreamzzz, I'm not really sure if it works quite as well unless it's supported by the story. Taking a look at all the different modules that you get in this set, this is really the springboard towards the most amount of customization that you can get for the modular system. And honestly, most of the modules are pretty much just originating from the set, with the other sets kind of just acting as sort of extra. You have the two arms, two blasters, two different heads mounted on mixel joints, a block where you can attach different pieces to, two different wheel components, two different cockpits, and the legs, as well as two different front fenders. And altogether, it all makes for a ton of different interesting combinations. Honestly, I find the most interesting thing about this is that the way that certain things attach to each other is not just using the same uniform type of connections. Not everything is using clips and bars. For instance, it provides you with two different heads to mount on mixel joints, it provides you with axles to attach the legs to a different style of vehicle, and altogether, that's one of the most interesting things about this modular system. They're not all relying on the same type of connection point, which is really very interesting. We'll take a look at the two vanilla kind of standard style of builds in a second, but I do want to showcase just some of the different things you can do with the set. Again, I am an absolute sucker whenever LEGO does something like this. I think it's a ton of fun, and while it might have been maybe pulled off a little bit cleaner and a little bit better in terms of just being able to polish the different modules, I'm a big fan of how they actually pulled off all of this in the end, because it just feels so creative and unique to mix and match the different pieces and have very, very radically different builds out of them. I do like that even though there is some confusion between the hero and villain color schemes here, they did make an attempt to make some of the builds feel more evil and menacing than others. For instance, this head for Zero here is a really cool creature head build, utilizing some of the newer Speed Champion slope elements to have a very unique style of tiger head compared to the much more curved and more cartoony style of normal Dreamzzz animals. The angles here just make it feel a lot more aggressive, which is really cool. Altogether, there's a lot of really fun configurations you can do here, and I just tried to showcase a few of them in this review. I'm really curious to see folks get their hands on these sets and try to come up with their own configurations for what these could look like. But now let's take a look at the final configurations and the quote-unquote official modes of each of these creatures. Starting off with Cooper's Tiger Mech, which is the main vehicle of the set. Unfortunately, because most of the emphasis was on making it a modular build, the mech as a build does suffer a little bit in terms of cohesion and just playability compared to other builds. There's no elbow articulation, no knee articulation, very, very limited actual hand articulation for moving the blades and the hands around, and a lot of that is intentional to allow it to support its own weight when you actually are utilizing the arms as front legs or just using them in different configurations. Unfortunately, because of that though, I do feel like the mech is actually not quite as good as the sum of its parts. The individual modules are so much fun to play with, but when you actually put them into this official configuration, it's honestly not the most interesting thing to me. Sure, I guess it's nice you can articulate the head back and forth, and you do have a space for the driver as well, but it does end up feeling a little bit unfinished. It feels a little bit blocky in the way that it comes across, because again, the entire thing was built using modular components. Of course, compromises had to be made in the build here to allow for that feature, but honestly, as a mech itself, I'm not the biggest fan of this build, and I feel like the color scheme of having the legs be very different in color than the arms just really don't make it feel very cohesive as a build. Unfortunately, I do think that most consumers will not even realize that this has a modular component to it. Like, I didn't even realize that myself until I actually built it out of the box. Like, looking at the box images, it kind of just looks like a mech versus a car, and I feel like a lot of folks might miss out on just how fun this is if they don't actually realize that all of this is meant to be modular. And that's really something I wanted to showcase in this review, was just the amount of possibilities that you can get across. I don't know if that comes across well in the box art, because I didn't even notice that when looking at images, but it is genuinely a fun feature. It's just the most standard official, like, quote-unquote best configurations of the builds are honestly just not even that interesting, because there's just so much more you can do with the different pieces that make it fun to play with, but not necessarily fun to display and look at when it's actually done. I feel like in general, LEGO Dreamzzz does have a slight issue with cohesion, where the builds kind of feel very scattered. They almost feel like LEGO Movie 2 style builds, which were a lot of fun and very well built and very vibrant, but definitely hard to tell what style they're trying to come across, and they're kind of a mix of a lot of different clashing aspects. Thankfully though, the Zero Hot Rod car, when finally put together outside of a random Azure kind of connector piece on the side, is actually really cohesive as a villain vehicle build. It's remarkably simple for what it is, but it actually works really well, and I feel like it really gets the job done very nicely for this style of build. There's just a very clean color scheme at work here, black, white, and just a little bit of a hint of these fluorescent orange elements, plus the addition of the extra beast head, which thankfully you can store on the back of the vehicle attached on the mixel joint there, just in case you don't want to have that be completely separate. Altogether, the car itself is a lot of fun to play with, and actually I really prefer the car to the final mech in general. I feel like the car is just super solid, it's a good villain vehicle, and while it might not be as cool or crazy as the previous villain vehicles that we've gotten for Dreamzzz, like the Nightmare Shark Ship and the Midnight Raven are some of the best standout builds for LEGO Dreamzzz. This villain vehicle is very, very vanilla and very basic as a result, but honestly, I don't really mind it that much, as long as maybe later on in the summer we get a much more dedicated villain build for something a little bit bigger. I'm totally happy with this being our introduction to the villain faction. It's sleek, it's clean, it is a lot of fun to play with and drive around, and even just with the pieces you get in just the car, you can already change around the configuration, placing the front head for a tiger or wolf-like creature on the front there, instead of using the standard skull head on the front, which is just super cool. Of course, I did have to create and recreate some of the different options of the official configurations shown in the back of the instruction manual as well. It is not just me creating unholy abominations here with these LEGO Dreamzzz modular components, of course, and taking a look at some of those configurations, it's actually super cool what you can do. You've got a little bit of a smaller flying jet here with the Cooper components, which actually looks really solid on its own. You take the front fender of the car and attach it as a back glider, you have the two wings being attached onto the block, and even the head just makes it feel like an autonomous drone, and then you can use the other pieces to kind of make a team-up vehicle between the hero and the villain here, where Cooper's got the giant arms on the sides of the car, and of course Zero is driving the front of the hot rod. This is a pretty cohesive style of build, but there's even more that you can do. For instance, you can then use the wheels of Zero's car to make a two-armed and four-wheeled vehicle, and then a jet for the villain as well, where all these jet components feel really cool, and I kind of just wish they had even larger wings where you can make all sorts of different components with builds like these. Altogether, again, this is just barely scratching the surface of what you can do. I'm not going to showcase every single component, and you can probably get the point by now. I just really wanted to showcase as many different configurations as I possibly could in this video, because they're just honestly a ton of fun to play around with. Altogether, for $100, I've gotten a lot of fantastic play value out of this set. I think it's totally worth the money, and it is a lot more fun to play with than display. Honestly, again, as I said, the builds don't even necessarily look that good when finished, but it's just so much fun to come up with your own configurations of jets and mechs. And if only the color scheme and just the final polish of the vehicles were just a lot cooler and better than they actually are, I feel like this could be a really, really big winner of a set. That being said, let's now take a look at some of the side builds included. You get this little creature which is meant to be part of the villain faction, and it's actually pretty creepy how you can just grab a minifigure, grasp it with the front claws, and then use these brand new elements used as wires to kind of grab onto their legs. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with this, even just being a smaller build, and the villain's side builds for this wave are a lot of fun. The dual molded brain piece I'm sure is going to come in handy for a lot of different mocks and different types of things that you can do with it. I just love how these can like pick up minifigures and toss them around. But speaking of the figures, let's take a look at each of them, starting with Zero here, who does appear to be the main villain of this wave. Zero and his minions sport brand new dual molded headpieces, which are very, very specialized. Obviously, they are meant to be some sort of like digital computer virus type of villains that are also Spartan themed. So you have these like traditional Spartan style helmets, dual molded in white and transparent red, with a pixelated mohawk style of feather design. Honestly, I kind of wish that they decided not to pixelate the top hood, because I feel like this would make for a really great medieval helmet colored in like a dual mold of gunmetal gray and silver. If not for the pixels literally molded into the feathers there, like the helmet itself would make for a really phenomenal medieval style of helmet. And unfortunately, because this is very video game themed, you're pretty limited in what you can actually do with it, even if LEGO decides to recolor it, but still, it is a really cool helmet piece and definitely one of the coolest villain pieces introduced for a brand new character. They also recolored the Ninjago Sons of Garmadon armor in transparent red, which is super cool, a great color to get here, and add to the fact the villain has dual molded legs, it just feels very deluxe in its presentation, and I'm a huge fan of how they were able to pull off this villain. I think it's going to be one of the most striking minifigures of the year, and honestly, LEGO Dreamzzz never misses when it comes to their villains, and this is no exception. Zero is fantastic and easily my favorite figure of the wave. The henchmen are also fun to get. Cool to get the helmet pieces in gunmetal gray and white. I think it's just another cool color scheme, and they are just using the small little Dreamling minion body, although I personally would have loved to see maybe just other minifigure style villains, like just make this character as a minifigure. I feel like that would have been super cool to just have a ton of black suited henchmen running around, because right now, while it is a little bit funny and goofy to see the gigantic helmets on these tiny bodies, I'm not really sure how menacing they are as villains, because they obviously are meant to be a little bit more goofy and silly in their presentation. I like the color scheme and I like the helmet. It's just honestly something that I really wish we got as a standard minifigure as well, to make the minifigures a little bit more intimidating. Moving on to the heroes and standard civilians though, this is a standard Dreamer. He doesn't really have a name, just kind of a generic minifigure who has some sort of a VR headset on with the eyes swirling. Unfortunately, no other alternate face here, and it would have been really cool to get maybe a version of the character who isn't having his brain being drained by whatever this villain creature is, and unfortunately it is just kind of a standard headpiece there. It's very, very unique and specialized for the piece, but I think the pajama element is very useful. Finally, we have Cooper here, who seems to have ditched the titanium, metallic, silver components that he was featuring in the previous wave of LEGO Dreamzzz, but still holding on to the dual molded hat component, which was introduced, kind of utilizing the J hairpiece with a hat on it, which is pretty nice. He has two different expressions, one very angry and one with a special techno visor, and he has built on the back of his jacket. You know, because bro is just literally built different. Of course, the previous versions of Cooper with printing on the sides of the legs and even dual molded components were a lot more interesting than this one, but I still think it is a pretty decent representation of the main hero to get. And with that, we can move on to the next set. The next one is 71491 Mateo with the Z-Blob action race car, and one thing that you will notice here is they have introduced a brand new mold for Z-Blob in this wave, which is super, super cool. It is a long time coming, and I am very happy to get that. You have a couple of different villain components here, including a brand new villain minifigure who we'll be looking at the end of this particular look at the set, and for the first time, we are getting LEGO tires recolored in a transparent color, transparent green in particular for the tires, which I didn't even realize when looking at photos of the set, but they just look super cool and vibrant when you're actually playing with the car. Starting off with the villain side build here, you have a pretty nice and actually pretty intricate way the legs are built up for the spider-like legs of this creature. You have that new printed 1x2 transparent red tile here, and you also have the dual molded brain being introduced in yet another set. It's cool that once you actually get all the sets, you have a small army of those spiders to act as villains, but now let's take a look at the actual car. The car itself is somewhat modular in its design, although really the only modular components are near the back and the front. The only downside of the car to me is that I feel like this is a really cool vehicle, it has a cool color scheme, but it ends up feeling very unfinished for whatever reason. There are a lot of exposed studs on the side here, like random plates being exposed, the cockpit doesn't fully cover up the build, there's random Technic being showcased, like even the sides of the cockpit almost make it feel like it's just not finished, like something was missing. And it's very strange to me. Like, I feel like they could have easily just put tiles on the side here instead of plain 2x3 plates. It's very, very odd because it just feels like this could have used just 1% more polishing. Like, this is almost a prototype version of the vehicle. There are things that I really do like about the set. Like, for instance, you have the tubes on the side mounted at an angle, which I think is super, super cool. You have the Z-Blob kind of style of macaroni tubes looking like slime coursing through the engine details. You have brand new pieces introduced for LEGO Dreamzzz that, I mean, honestly, kind of look like fart elements here. I don't really know what to make of them, and Dreamzzz has always been on kind of a bit of a losing streak with these new elements. Like, the first feather and jet exhaust pieces we got for the first wave were kind of weird, and I wasn't super convinced by them. And then we got, like, newer style of blade elements, which also didn't really look that good, and then we get these, like, smoke burst elements. I think they're okay for what they're trying to be, but definitely not the most useful or interesting pieces. The modularity aspect of this car comes in the fact that you can remove the front fender here, so you get the front bumper, which you can switch out with the different cars, and you also have two different blasters, which you can use on the side, plus a block. But if you buy just the set, there's literally nothing you can do with it. There's basically no sort of different functionality you can use to set it up at. Unfortunately, it kind of is what it is. There is a rebuild option to turn it into a motorcycle as well that involves a complete rebuild of the vehicle, much like the other Dream sets, but it actually does still retain the same exact functionality as the prior vehicles. Of course, once you actually have a chance to mix and match this with some of the other components of the other sets, then this is where the fun begins. There are several different front bumpers which you can use to mix and match in the set, and of course you have this very useful versatile block element where you can use to mount different types of weaponry to the vehicle. It would have been cool to be able to mount things to the side, like even just having some more clip connections on the side of it, but altogether, it just is a lot of fun to play with when you actually incorporate the other pieces of the vehicles. Overall, for $50 US, I'm a little bit mixed on this set, to be completely honest. Sure, the price per part ratio is relatively there, it's 485 pieces for $50 or 50 euros, but the end result just feels very unpolished and unfinished. It feels like it could have used just one more run in the iteration cycle at LEGO to really finish it up, to clean up those exposed studs, and I'm not even against like exposed studs, but it does look really weird to have just like 2x3 gray stripes along the side of it. The cockpit isn't fully enclosed for the vehicle, there's a big open air space. And again, just almost feels like this could have used a little bit more work to be finalized. Moving on to the minifigures, we have our only other villain minifigure introduced for the wave in the form of D-Shock here. They have recolored the Storm Mohawk element in the bright yellowish green color. This is kind of the fluorescent coloration, very different than the lime that we just got for Tox for LEGO Ninjago. And underneath you can see a pretty cool, almost like 3D style of digital head for the skull underneath, which is a very nice head print. It of course is covered up by the mask somewhat, but I do like how that continues onto the ribcage in the chest, and he does have a very similar style as Zero, with the actual name of the character being written on one of the legs, which is really interesting, and I'm really curious if we're going to be getting any other villain minifigures. It's a very, very bright color scheme for a villain, but I think it's one that works out for a technological opponent, and I'm really curious to see what this guy's backstory is going to be like in the show. We also do get a little bit of a Dreamling included in the set as well. This one has his brain being drained by the main villain, so it does come with a new headpiece with the VR goggles style setup with the swirly eyes. It's a cute little small thing, but nothing super groundbreaking. What is really cool though is that Mateo is actually fully kitted up here with dual molded legs featuring printing on the side of the legs and silver dual molding, which is very, very cool to see. He has a weapon that is fairly basic, just utilizing this year's newer style of hourglass blaster piece, but I actually do think this is a really solid version of Mateo to get, especially because the legs just look so good. Overall, I do like how they continue to put in maximum effort into at least the main character of this series, but we can now move on to the next set. 71489 is Cooper's flying video game controller, retailing for $20 US and coming with 266 pieces, which is again pretty good value. You have the option to rebuild this into a helicopter, but I do want to focus in on the Cyber Brain Spider first, which is kind of the main villain component of the set. Unfortunately, there are no other minifigures included aside from Cooper. There isn't really even a Dreamling whose brain you can drain, so I feel like that is a bit of a missed opportunity because you do have this main villain, but really nobody for it to attack, and basically just one minifigure in the set. It is nice, however, to get that dual molded brain component in a cheap set for $20. It's a really cool component to get, and the new wire pieces I'm sure are gonna really come in handy for people making like circuit boards or mechs which have wires attached to them. I like how they made this very clearly wire-shaped piece to really just add in a lot more detail to LEGO style of builds. Moving on from that though, I want to jump into the jet. We have a recolor of the Ninjago Prime Empire blades in transparent opalescent satin blue, which is very slightly different than the regular transparent blue that we have seen it before in, and I actually really like the way the video game controller is built. It's utilizing a lot of different angles from studs on both sides to different angled components making the sides of the controller, and altogether it's actually really nicely done. The video game controller by itself is a pretty cool starting off point for the build. And while again, I do feel like this whole concept is a little too like r/fellow kids to me, like, oh, someone sat down as a LEGO executive in a boardroom and would like, kids like video games, right? Kids like gaming, Nintendo Switch, gamers rise up. Let's make a whole wave about gaming, and just very much blatantly tried to just put in these giant video game controllers into the sets, whether or not it really just makes sense as a theme. But as far as builds go, I actually kind of like it. I think it is very creative for a build to have booster engines on the back of this Nintendo Switch-like gaming controller, and then of course you have the jet build in the front, utilizing a transparent black cockpit for the character to sit in. Altogether, the color scheme is pretty solid for this one. The red, the light blue, and the fluorescent yellow is a pretty slick color scheme, and I do like how this is a very Cooper-focused vehicle as opposed to the main $100 set, which does focus on Cooper, but also just integrates a lot of white and black into the color scheme to make it work with Zero as well. Looking at the instruction manual here, you can take a look at some of the incredible artwork featured in the manual. That's one thing Dreamzzz always gets right, is just really nice artwork in every single page of the manual, and for once the build is actually very, very different for this style of actual jet. You can turn it into a helicopter instead. There are extra pieces to facilitate that, and while I didn't have a chance to rebuild it for this review, I definitely would recommend you check out Bricks by Mind's reviews. He always usually rebuilds all of the sets, so go check that out. I actually do build all of them a second time for my own collection, but I usually wait until the sets go on sale and I just buy another copy of the set later in the year so I can display both versions of the set next to each other without having to waste the time to rebuild it myself. Altogether, for a $20 set, I'm pretty happy with the value here. I feel like you do get fairly good value with this style of build. It's very swooshable, it's fun to play with. It reminds me of the Ultra Agents like $20 jet that we got for the final wave back in the day, and the only minor downside is that when you actually store the figure in the jet, there is no place to reliably store the weapon. These clips on the side do not actually serve as a good place to attach it, and unfortunately, that's just the only minor con because, again, you do have to just set the weapon aside, but altogether, I do like the build, and we can now move on to our next set. 71490 is Izzy and Buano, the gaming bunny. Obviously, Bunshu the bunny has been upgraded to now become an epic gamer moment. It has 252 pieces, retailing for $20, which also is pretty good value, containing a carrot Dreamling, an evil minion to battle, as well as a fully posable bunny to play around with. I'm gonna be completely honest, I went into the set not really expecting to like it that much. I feel like the bunny themed sets for Dreamzzz are really not necessarily my sort of thing. I think they're cute overall, but obviously I gravitate more towards the jets and the mechs, just kind of what I'm interested in when it comes to LEGO, but this really surprised me. The posability that you can get out of this bunny figure is kind of legendary, and I don't know how they were able to pull it off so well and make it so well balanced, but I gained a really deep appreciation for this set after just playing around with it for a little bit on camera, and honestly, it skyrocketed up to being one of my favorites in the wave just because of all the crazy poses that you can get the bunny into. If you count the number of points of articulation here, you've got 2 points of articulation on ball joints of the feet, 2 points for the upper legs, 1 point for the tail, 2 points for the upper arms, 2 points for the hands, 3 points on each hand for the fingers, 1 point for the neck to move around, and then 2 points for the ears. It actually is remarkably well articulatable. There's a lot of different things that you can make the bunny do, and I really appreciate just how posable it is, and it feels just very alive in the way that it moves around. You can have it doing like a hands up pose with the arms crossed, you can have it balance on one leg. There's just a lot of really cool things that you can do with the bunny to make it feel very alive in its movements and its characterization. The bunny has only one facial expression, but you can obviously just clearly get it into all sorts of different poses and really just adds a lot of character to it. Like here, with the hands on the hips, it almost looks like proud, almost like a Superman pose looking up, and then you have more of an action battle pose where it's doing like a karate chop here. We had some crossed arms poses where it looks a little bit annoyed, and you could even have it balance on one foot for the skateboard here, which is pretty nice. The modularity feature on this one is probably the weakest when it comes to the rest of the set, to be honest. Like, it's really not that exciting to be able to attach and detach the jets, but overall, because of how posable and fun this is, I really enjoy this build. One very funny thing I also appreciate and find kind of almost darkly funny in the instruction manual is the entire point of the villain here is he has a, I guess, carrot blending device. Like, all of the other villains are sucking out the brains of their opponents, but this one is literally like turning the carrot, which is a living creature with a face, into what looks to be like carrot juice in the instruction manual. Like, those transparent orange tubes are supposed to be like carrot juice on the back, so it's kind of funny how the villain is literally just going around killing different like Dreamling characters, but that's kind of cute. I think it's just a really funny sort of play setup you can have for a build like this. And of course it is nice to get a little carrot piece. The one thing I will always be complaining about though is that the face here is a sticker, and at least in my experience, every single time one of these pieces uses a sticker, it always just ends up peeling off. It never looks good. Even just after like a few hours, it will just start to peel off, and I never really got it to stick on right. Izzy, however, gets a brand new minifigure for the set, which is her main look for this wave, and I think it's okay. Previous versions have gone really all out when it comes to like printing on the side of the legs and even some dual molded components, and this one is just alright in comparison. The coral color scheme is nice, although the Ninjago Shintaro dungeon armor does feel a little bit overplayed here. It would have been cool to get it at least in a new color instead of just silver. I think if they were to recolor that armor piece in like a transparent opalescent satin color, maybe that would have really made it stand out, but altogether, it just kind of feels like a hodgepodge of a couple of different things. Moving on from that though, we can take a look at the two smaller sets of the wave, starting off with 71487 Z-Blob's Robot and Vehicle Adventure. It retails for $10 and comes with 121 pieces, as well as an exclusive minifigure of Mateo, and the entire point of the set is you can take it apart and build 20 different things. From jets to scorpions to mechs to cars. There's a lot of things that you can make out of this build. And I actually really like that. Obviously, most of the builds do not take full advantage of all the pieces included. A lot of them are little tiny stuff, like you have like a little jet flyer here, or you've got little types of helicopters, but I actually do like how creative they were able to get with these Z-Blob creations. Like, there's a lot of different things here, and the instruction manual fully commits to the bit, showing you instructions on how to build every single one of the different alternate models. While this seems like a pretty simple set, I am sure that for the LEGO designers, this was actually pretty complicated to put together and figure out, well, how many different things can we create to make them feel distinct and yet have them all just use the same limited amount of pieces. And I feel like this kind of set really shows the power of a LEGO build, which showcases just how many different things you can do with just the same palette. However, I am just going to focus up on the main build as a whole, which is Blob as a tiny little mech featuring some propellers on the back here. I first of all love the new Blob element they introduced as a new mold for him. I think it's just really cute and clever how they made him his own specialized piece, and we're even getting it already recolored in the botanical sets as different like ends of flowers in white, so it's really cool how it isn't just limited to Blob. First of all, taking a look at the posability of this mech, you can move the elbows around, the upper arms, the legs, the feet, and even mount the propellers on mixel joints, which is a nice touch. It's actually pretty posable, all things considered, and I do like just the amount of different things you can do with it. From having a blaster on one hand and the sword on the other, you can really make it feel like it is in a battle pose or a flying pose, and of course, getting a recolor of the new D tile, which was introduced in the Snow White Cottage set, is very cool to get in white. It's definitely going to be a very useful piece to get, and I like how many useful pieces this has, from the 1x2 flat tile elements which are curved around the sides, which are fairly rare and hard to come by, kind of a relatively newer piece, to the Blob element itself, to the propellers, to the wheels, to the swords. All of this just makes for a really nice parts pack, and for $10, it is hard to complain. Even the minifigure is a pretty cool callback to LEGO Futuron. I don't know what's going on in 2025, but we are getting a ton of LEGO Futuron references throughout 2025, from LEGO Space's newest faction retaining the Futuron design, to this one having a more blobby version of the classic space logo. It's a cool minifig to get, and I do like how we're getting a different hairpiece than the other ones, with a streak of red in the hairpiece as well, as opposed to the one with just 2 streaks of green that we got for the other set. Moving on from that though, we can take a look at the final set, or the final regular set of the wave, 71488, which is Bunchu's Creative Animal Adventures. This has 143 pieces, retailing for $10 US, and coming with an exclusive minifigure of Izzy, as well as a new recolor of the Squishmallow piece, which we were introduced to in the collectible minifig series. The bunny itself is okay. Honestly, I feel like the very flat face kind of falls into the uncanny valley for me. I think it is kind of weird to see it with just a very flat 3x3 tile instead of any sort of depth to the face itself, and I understand they were working with pretty limited components here, but even just having some slightly rounded edges to the face I feel like would have helped a lot. As it is right now, I don't really know if it's just me, but I think the bunny is a little bit creepy. Like, it almost feels like kind of something that you would see in some sort of a horror movie where it's got like just this very like flat face, dead eyes, and like especially when it's standing up on the back legs. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I'm not the biggest fan of this build. I think the other bunny included was a lot cuter in the other larger set, but the good thing is if you don't like the bunny, well, the entire point of the set is you can rebuild it into all sorts of different creatures. And this time, the focus of the build is on making different animals. So you've got lions, you've got birds, you've got sea turtles, you've got butterflies, and I'm honestly really impressed with just how many different animals they were able to make out of just these pieces. Like, every single animal is completely different, and that is genuinely impressive given that it is a very limited array of elements. Of course though, just focusing in on the main bunny, one thing I do like is the color scheme, and it is, regardless, a very nice parts pack with the different colors, very vibrant in the different blues and yellows and corals, just a really nice piece to get. Overall, moving on to the final Izzy minifigure here, this one is just okay, kind of a more casual version of the character, but I do like how we are getting a new torso for this character, and the recolor of the Squishmallow piece, or the stuffed animal element with a brand new bunny-inspired design, is very, very cute. Having the arms kind of act as bunny ears on the side of the creature, which is easily the best part of the set for me. I like how LEGO is making that kind of like a stealth line of collectibles, like the CMF has 2, and then this one has 1, and then LEGO Friends has a couple in their wave. It's just a really cute little piece to get for a creature like this. And finally with that, we can move on to the last set of the wave, which is the Polybag 30698 Cooper's Flying Controller mini build, which is the 3rd Cooper themed set we are getting this wave. Kind of wild that we're getting 3 of them in one wave. First of all, I actually really like how for a polybag we get a small sort of spider-like villain build. It's very cool to get conflict in a box here, and the gaming controller is pretty nicely built. It's utilizing the 2 new elements, so it kind of gives you a taste towards what is coming for the theme, and while again I'm not the biggest fan of those new smoke contrail elements, I think they look okay for this particular build, and the gaming controller being predominantly studs on the side is really nicely done. I like the curvature here. the amount of detail factored into the upper and lower part of the build, and altogether, having the Cooper minifigure go alongside this is actually a pretty nice touch. I really do like the amount of detail here that they managed to factor into just a $5 polybag, and the other really cool thing is that this came in a paper bag, which was very interesting. All of the polybags for 2025, and I don't know if this is just a Europe exclusive thing, but they all do seem to be coming in paper polybags, which is quite interesting. But altogether, with that, we have summed up our look at the entirety of the LEGO Dreamzzz 2025 lineup. It is certainly one of the most interesting waves of Dreamzzz, or really any LEGO theme we have gotten yet. With a huge focus on modularity in between the sets, I think that is probably one of the strongest parts of the wave, and I wish that was reflected more in some of the sets like the Blob car, which totally could have benefited from even more modular action. That being said though, I'm not 100% convinced by this entire gaming sub-theme that they're trying to do here. It again feels almost a little bit disingenuous for LEGO to just come together and be like, you know what? People like gaming, so let's just make a generic gaming wave. I don't really know how I feel about that. Like, I think that LEGO Dreamzzz could have offered a lot more potential than just a gaming focus, especially because just a few years ago we literally got Ninjago Prime Empire, which also had a similar thing with all the ninja going into this gaming world, so I don't know, feels a bit of a rehash of what we've gotten in the past, but overall it is a very interesting wave, definitely mixed in terms of the sets here. I like a lot of the concepts, but it also feels like a lot of these sets could have used just a couple more runs in the iterations here to just make them be as good as they could be, especially when it came to like the Blob race car. It's really weird how a lot of the set feels unfinished to me, so overall, definitely one of the more mixed waves of LEGO Dreamzzz. There isn't really one standout set of this wave like there usually is for a big villain set. I think the closest thing to it is the $100 modular set, which I think stands out for different reasons. The modular functionality is a lot of fun, as I said, but also I think that it does impact the end result, and the final aesthetics of that vehicle just don't really quite look as good as many of the other Dreamzzz builds. Overall, it's an interesting wave, and I'm very curious to see if LEGO Dreamzzz will continue to last. I'm not sure how well the show is doing, and honestly, as someone who's watched the entire show, I definitely do feel like it could use a lot of work. The ideas are there, there's the potential for it to be great, but it does just kind of feel like the story is a little bit handicapped in terms of where it can go, because they are just limiting themselves in the amount of storytelling they can do, and the characterization of the characters just isn't really all that interesting. So I'm not really sure if LEGO Dreamzzz is going to continue past this year, but if this is going to be one of the final waves of LEGO Dreamzzz, I am happy that they are trying out something new. They're trying this modular feature, which is at least something that we haven't really seen compared to what we've seen in the past. So that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed our look at this particular LEGO Dreamzzz wave. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this video, and be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thank you so much, and bye for now.